By the early 1960s, the MiG-21 fishbed had established itself as the Soviet Union's frontline interceptor, but its limitations were becoming difficult to ignore. Short range, minimal radar capability, and a light weapons load left it increasingly unsuited to the demands of frontal aviation as Western air power advanced. The aircraft the Soviets measured themselves against was the F-4 Phantom II, a large twin-engine, multi-role platform that could carry heavy ordnance, operate beyond visual range, and loiter far from its base. Nothing in the Soviet tactical inventory matched it. The Su-15 Flagger served the PVO home defense interceptor role, but it was a point defense aircraft with no relevance to the frontline fighter requirement. What Soviet planners needed was something new, a fighter with greater endurance, a modern radar, and the ability to operate from shorter airfields closer to the front. The response to that requirement would become the MiG-23, a program that carried enormous expectations from its inception. The path to the MiG-23 was not straightforward. The Mikoyan Bureau initially explored a stall concept designated the MiG-23PD, known to NATO as Faithless, which used dedicated lift jets mounted in the fuselage to shorten takeoff and landing distances. The approach proved mechanically complex and operationally impractical, and the concept was abandoned. What replaced it was a variable geometry wing, a swing wing design that could sweep forward for low-speed handling and rearward for high-speed flight. The idea was not without precedent. The American F-111 had already demonstrated the swing wing concept in a large strike aircraft, and its influence on Soviet thinking was considerable. Within the Soviet Union itself, the Sukhoi Bureau had taken a simpler path with the Su-17 Fitter, which used a fixed inner wing panel with only the outer sections pivoting. The Mikoyan Bureau chose a more ambitious full-span pivot. The first pre-production aircraft, the MiG-23S, flew with the older Tumansky R-27 engine and served primarily as a development platform. The MiG-23 Flogger A followed as the initial operational configuration. On paper, the design promised range, speed, and field performance in a single airframe. In practice, the complexity of the swing wing mechanism introduced weight, maintenance burden, and handling characteristics that would define the aircraft's reputation for decades. Few Soviet aircraft went through as many production revisions as the MiG-23. With the first mass production fighter variant, the MiG-23M Flogger B entered service in the early 1970s and established the baseline configuration and the baseline complaints. For Warsaw Pact allies, the Soviets produced the MiG-23MF, a downgraded version of the M with reduced radar capability and simplified avionics, reflecting Moscow's standard practice of withholding frontline technology from export customers. Efforts to address the aircraft's poor agility led to the MiG-23ML Flogger G, a lightened variant with a more powerful engine and revised aerodynamics intended to improve dogfight performance. The final and most capable fighter version, the MiG-23MLD Flogger K, introduced vortex generators on the wing glove to improve high angle of attack behavior, a modification that acknowledged problems present since the airframe's origin. A dedicated PVO interceptor variant, the MiG-23P, was adapted specifically for Soviet air defense duties, optimized for ground-controlled intercept profiles rather than air superiority. The airframe also branched into ground attack. The MiG-23BN Flogger H was a fighter-bomber derivative retaining the variable geometry wing but configured for air-to-ground ordnance delivery. The MiG-27 Flogger D/J went further, redesigning the forward fuselage and simplifying the intakes for a dedicated ground attack role. The sheer length of this variant list tells its own story. A continuous effort to fix what the original design could not resolve. And the MiG-23's problems were not abstract engineering shortcomings. They were felt directly by the pilots who flew it. The MiG-23M Flogger B, as the most widely produced variant, bore the worst of the criticism. Rearward visibility from the cockpit was severely restricted. The heavy spine of the fuselage and the canopy design created blind spots that left pilots unable to clear their 6 o'clock in combat. The aircraft's spin behavior was dangerous and, in certain configurations, unrecoverable. Engine reliability was a persistent concern, with the Tumansky and later Khachaturian power plants prone to compressor stalls and flameouts during aggressive maneuvering. The swing-wing mechanism, while effective at altering the aircraft's flight envelope, imposed handling characteristics that changed dramatically across sweep positions, and demanding constant pilot attention during the phases of flight where attention was least available. In a turning fight, the MiG-23 was outclassed by most of its contemporaries. The MiG-23ML Flogger G improved the situation with reduced weight and better thrust, but it did not eliminate the fundamental distrust pilots felt toward the airframe. The MiG-23MLD Flogger K added vortex generators and refined flight control logic in a late attempt to address handling complaints, yet many crews remained skeptical. A telling measure of the aircraft's reputation was the preference many Soviet and Allied pilots expressed for the MiG-21 fishbed, a smaller, older, and far simpler aircraft that offered predictable handling and honest flight characteristics, qualities the MiG-23 never fully achieved. The Soviet Union sold or transferred the MiG-23 to more than 30 countries, but the export experience only deepened the aircraft's poor reputation. The earliest export variant, the MiG-23MS Flogger E, was severely downgraded, fitted with the older Jaybird radar instead of the more capable High-Lark system reserved for Soviet units. The result was an aircraft that retained the MiG-23's complexity and handling difficulties while sacrificing much of the sensor capability that might have justified them. Warsaw Pact operators received the MiG-23MF, a somewhat more capable model, though still below the standard of Soviet-operated aircraft. Maintenance demands were high, spare parts supply was inconsistent, and many Allied air forces lacked the technical infrastructure to keep the aircraft operational at acceptable rates. Later, select Allies received the MiG-23ML, which offered genuine improvements in performance and agility, but its distribution was limited and came late in the aircraft's service life. The MiG-23BN Flogger H saw wider export success as a fighter bomber, where its range and payload capacity were more relevant than its air-to-air shortcomings. Across most operator nations, however, the MiG-23 was regarded as a difficult, maintenance-heavy aircraft that underdelivered on its promises. The MiG-23's operational history provided its harshest evaluation. Syrian MiG-23MS and MiG-23MF aircraft were committed in significant numbers during the 1982 Lebanon War, where they encountered Israeli F-15 Eagles over the Bekaa Valley. The results were deeply lopsided. Israeli pilots, operating aircraft with superior radar, missiles, and situational awareness, claimed numerous floggers with minimal losses. Syrian crews, many flying downgraded export variants with limited beyond visual range capability, were at a systemic disadvantage that pilot skill alone could not overcome. Libyan MiG-23s fared no better in engagements over Chad and in confrontations with U.S. Navy aircraft over the Gulf of Sidra. During the Iran-Iraq War, Iraqi MiG-23s faced Iranian F-14 Tomcats, another severe mismatch with the Tomcat's AWG-9 radar and Phoenix missile system operating well beyond the Flogger's effective engagement envelope. The MiG-23ML, when it appeared in later conflicts, showed improved results in limited engagements, benefiting from better agility and upgraded weapons. The MiG-23BN served in the ground attack role across several of these conflicts, where its performance was less scrutinized but largely unremarkable. Taken as a whole, the combat record did not contradict the MiG-23's reputation. It confirmed it, with only narrow exceptions. For much of the 1970s, NATO regarded the MiG-23 as a serious and capable threat. Intelligence assessments, based largely on satellite imagery, signals intercepts, and limited technical data, credited the Flogger with performance characteristics that placed it in the same class as contemporary Western fighters. The reality, when it finally became available, was considerably less impressive. A significant intelligence breakthrough came when Western agencies obtained MiG-23MS airframes through third-party transfers, allowing direct technical evaluation of the early export variant. The United States conducted classified flight test programs using acquired Floggers, revealing the aircraft's handling deficiencies, radar limitations, and narrow operational envelope firsthand. The MiG-23BN was similarly obtained and assessed through Allied intelligence channels. The most capable variant to receive Western scrutiny was the MiG-23MLD Flogger K, whose evaluation confirmed that while late model improvements were genuine, they did not elevate the aircraft to the level NATO had long assumed. The gap between the perceived threat and the actual capability was substantial, a reminder that adversary assessments built on incomplete information tend to err toward overestimation. More than 5,000 MiG-23s were built across all variants, making it one of the most produced combat aircraft of the Cold War. By sheer volume, it was a significant element of Soviet and Allied air power for over 2 decades. Yet production numbers alone do not define a legacy. The MiG-23 occupied an uncomfortable position, too complex and costly to match the rugged simplicity of the MiG-21 fishbed, which outlasted it in frontline service with numerous air forces, and too flawed to compete with the generation that followed. That next generation arrived in the form of the MiG-29 Fulcrum and the Su-27 Flanker, both of which restored credibility to Soviet fighter design through superior agility, modern sensors, and pilot-friendly handling. The MiG-23 served as the bridge between these eras, a transitional design that absorbed the growing pains of variable geometry aerodynamics, look-down/shoot-down radar integration, and beyond visual range doctrine. It was a necessary step, but not a successful one. Its reputation as the most hated fighter in the Soviet inventory has endured precisely because the problems were never fully solved, only inherited, revised, and eventually left behind.